All right, so let's see. We have Katie Inouye in the middle. Katie's founder and VP of North America, Spark TS. And then closest to me here, Cora Leibig, founder and CEO of Chromatic 3D Materials. And then on the end, last but not least, Ben Oak, CEO of NCCO Group and also chair of their board. What's interesting as we put this together, the PDA folks and myself, is there's kind of three different archetypes of boards up here. Ben joined his family's business, and he'll tell you about that. Katie was looking to grow her business and launch a SaaS product out of a custom development and training business. And then Cora brought in outside capital and had investors on her board. And so there's kind of three different backstories to how these boards came about. So why don't, I'm going to ask you all an individual question, and then maybe the lead into that question would be a little bit more about your background than what I shared. So Katie, let's start with you. Oh, before we get to that, the whole purpose for today was to get questions from the audience. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions, and then we are looking for and want you all to contribute today. So please think about what questions you want to ask. And that was a big part of why we put today's event together. So, Katie, the question, and again, give us a little bit of your background before you do the answer, but you founded and launched Spark about 8 years ago. First 4 years, you didn't have any outsiders on your board. You then brought me in. We brought another outsider in trying to grow your business, so the focus was on the SaaS company and bringing in some outside DNA. That itself was a transition. You were trying to grow your company, and you ultimately wanted to aim towards an exit. So maybe just talk a little bit about yourself and then the kind of the thought process and how that went about when you formed your board.
Sure thing. So great to be here, everybody. So I started the company, like Rick said, 8 years ago. Originally, I set out really not to set up a SaaS company at all. I had gone out to do what a lot of us do, is maybe do some consulting, and specifically into the railroad industry. So I was consulting on regulatory initiatives within railroading, which was a bit niche, but I was consulting with some of the largest railroads in the country, and at the same time doing instructional design, which was my background. The company quickly turned into having a SaaS idea, and so for those first 4 years that Rick mentioned, really it was me. I always joked it was me and my laptop, and maybe later in those 4 years, a couple of employees or 1099 contractors as well. So at that stage of the company, especially having an LLC and then just switching to being an S-Corp sort of situation with the company, LLC taxes and S-Corp, but we were really, the board was me and my husband at the time, and it really felt like a check the box thing. Like, as a company, we should be doing this as an LLC. Let's do the documentation. There really weren't meaningful conversations about any sort of reporting or where the company's headed. The board was really an administrative task that I was doing for documentation purposes, and that was really it. I think it was probably about halfway through the journey that I started working with Rick, and as he mentioned, started to think about how I can grow the company. Now, I've got some of the larger railroads in the country using my SaaS product, reaching out to smaller railroads, starting to build a team, and the consulting instructional design business always sort of existed, but the transformation of the company to a SaaS company was starting to happen, and now I'm a little bit outside of my league as far as what I originally was thinking as far as a founder. And I know there's a lot of founders in the room or others that I speak to that was their vision from the beginning, but my vision and intentions with the company, changed over time. So at this stage, it was really great to have that outside expertise, and that's really what I was looking for, bringing Rick into the board on how do I scale a company, what are the processes in place, and really, truthfully, that network that we all, looking at this room, a lot of you are familiar faces. If I needed a fractional marketing person, I have Jessica here. which ended up, I was introduced to Jessica by Rick, so that working with Rick in that way was super useful. And as the last year of the company, we brought on another board member, and I started getting more serious about an exit, and so that really happened a little bit sooner than I planned. But that additional board member really started challenging me to really look harder at those longer-term objectives. So that's how that transpired.
Yeah, and when I brought John to you was because he was a SaaS CEO that had gotten outside financing. So again, kind of another piece in the puzzle.
That's right.
Yeah, and then we also should let you say a shout out to Jeff Redmond, since he played a very integral part in making the deal happen. So you might as well say thank you and giving you the opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Couldn't thank Jeff enough. And really, Jeff was fundamental from the business from the very early stages, before I even thought I had a business almost, until the very end with the exit and navigating that. But how I met Rick was through Jeff.
Thank you. Cora, you also are founder and CEO of Chromatic 3D Materials. What were your goals and expectations when you assembled your board? And things haven't always gone perfectly smoothly. There were some challenges and are some challenges that you're managing. How do you go about motivating the board and making or helping direct that board to continue to aim towards the goals that you originally set out for yourself?
Is this on?
Doesn't sound like it.
Now it is. Yeah, so Chromatic 3D Materials is a technology company. And what we provide is a new technology in the space of 3D printing. And so when I started it, my goal was really to create a company that would fill a really important niche in the 3D printing technology space. And a lot of things have changed since I started, because 3D printing has done a lot of bubbles and crashes and bubbles again. And trying to navigate, when there's bubbles happening, everyone's very excited to get in on a 3D printing technology company. When it's not a bubble, then not so much. So a lot of what we've had to do is to help the shareholders see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. See that we are tapping on the revenue sources, that we are growing and getting at the big opportunities that they're dreaming of. And just getting back to what were my goals with starting the board, I knew that to build a technology company, I was going to need to take in significant investment. So far, we've taken in about $16 million of investment, which pales in comparison to a lot of other 3D printing companies. So, when you're bringing in a board, you're bringing in a lot of shareholder oversight, and a lot of the goals were to have the board members who are representing their money, to give them the oversight and the insight into what was happening in the company. A lot of the goals were help us find additional pools of money, and a lot of the board members, all of the board members are experienced board members. And so they're looking after either similar companies in the space or companies that are customers of the space. So they have good insight into what do we need to do operationally in order to achieve some of the goals that they're seeing other companies achieve, or as well as understand the challenges and how to tap into more financing to help grow the business.
All right, thank you. Ben, unlike Katie and Cora, you didn't start the business yourself. In fact, you're a third generation family business owner and participant. You were brought in a little bit as a change agent. What caused you to join the company in that leadership role, and then what goals have you set for the company and yourself as you've pulled your board together?
Well, thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me today. And I think you give me too much credit to think that I came in as intentionally as a change agent. So I started with the company. Oh, by the way, on your table, I left a couple samples. So if you want to take one home, this is a product that we make right here in St. Paul. We manufacture specialty products for the restaurant industry. So restaurant guest checks, cash register rolls, food safety labels. We also do food preparation protocols. We have a group that does online food safety training. It's a 120-year-old company. And I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, and their job, they remind me, my job is just not to mess it up. But I came to the business through a different model. My dad had always told us that we could work for the company when we grew up, but we had to go do something else first. So I went and became a teacher. I taught at Breck School. In fact, one of my former students, Alex, he was actually, I didn't teach him, I just coached basketball for Alex, but I taught there for about 10 years and became an administrator and spent more and more time managing people and less time teaching. And that was, so I decided if I was going to manage people, I wanted to get paid for it. So I wound up going to work for the family business, and I started out as a general manager, eventually shut that down, and I became the HR director. And there was a lot of transfer of skills and responsibilities, I would say, from teaching to HR. There's, just not goal setting, accountability, employee development, all those things really fit nicely into my training. And so I was able to bring some of that to the company. And then in 2007, I was named to be the president. I was to be my dad's successor. And he was very good about naming the successor. He wasn't as good as stepping away from the role as he was naming it, but he did a good job of announcing that. So I wound up being in a place where, in 2007, if you remember, we had the Great Recession, and I remember sitting in a room with a group of CEO execs and bragging in 2012 that we had averaged 1% growth over the last 5 years. And one of the members said, you might want to sell the company and buy bonds. Because if that's all you're going to grow 1%, you're not going to get there. So we set out in 2012, 2013, said, we want to make sure we grow 10% a year. We want to grow 50% between 2013 and 2018. And so we set out to create acquisitions, partnerships. We did some internal growth, organic growth as part of that as well. And in fact, we did grow 50% in 2018. And then in 2018, we said, okay, what do we do now? And the ownership group said, we need to continue to grow. We need to continue to track towards that. And so we set a target of doubling in size in 10 years. And so we're, COVID kind of threw a bit of a curveball at us, but we're still on track. I think we can get to our goals by 2028. But in order to get there, one of the things that we needed, from my perspective, was a different governance structure. We had a set of board members, and the board had been meeting for 70 years, but it was often just a management group. It was very insular. In fact, it was very incestuous. It was either you were the family member, you were an owner, or you were an employee to be on the board. And so my take was, if we're going to grow double in size, we're going to need to bring some people in from outside. So when our CFO retired, we asked him to step on the board. So he became the first non-employee, non-family member, non-owner to be part of it. And then I added a second independent board member, and he had some specific industry experience with label manufacturing, and he was really impressive with that. We hired Liebig to help us identify that person, and really was very successful. And then we said, we really want to move into this digital space, and if we're going to move into digital space, I need somebody on my board who has experience. So I posted a board posting on the PDA website, and I would give a shout out to the PDA. It was a great source. So I had 130 people apply for this role, and it was really a great opportunity for me to sift through. And I found a woman who had been running started a company that did like a customized book selling thing, and it was done digitally. And she sold her company and moved on. And so we brought her onto the board. So that whole shift from having it be a management meeting to be a truly governance board has been really a big step for us.
Thank you for joining us today, Ben. So for all three of you, just a quick little answer about how you think CEOs should view value creation from their board differently depending on the ownership structure, life cycle, what your goals are. Any particular order?
All right, I can start with just, for me, I was similar to what you were saying at that stage when I started seeing, oh, my boards are resources. What are that outside expertise that I don't have internally that I can leverage, as well as, you know, as you're a founder, CEO, there's a lot of things right in front of my nose. I travel a lot. And it's hard to think strategically, well, not strategically necessarily, but long term. And so having that accountability at the board level was really important to me.
I guess I would add that just keeping in mind where everyone on the board is at and making sure that everyone's aligned towards where you're trying to go is important. Especially, I mentioned that it's VC based, so you bring people in partly because you're bringing in their financial oversight. You know, they invested money, but that changes where they start to become more on the defensive side. When they've decided maybe, when they've decided that maybe they're not investing anymore, you know, for strategic reasons, or they're out of money or something like that, then they're not necessarily in the mode of, they're thinking about how quickly can they get their money out and not necessarily what's in the best interest of growing the company. And so really keeping that in mind so you can adjust the ownership, the board membership when necessary, or bring in outsiders when necessary is important. So it's not directly answering your question, but touching on it.
Well, and I want to say, as an investor, you've done a masterful job at getting far and as fast as possible with the money you've had. So you've done wonderful with that. So I thank you. Ben.
So I would say, you know, for us, the value has been in a family business, really truly understanding that balance point. You know, on the one hand, you have the ownership group that has a very specific set of expectations and objectives. And then you have the management group that has kind of created the management strategic plan and so on. And the board can really help balance that and challenge the owners and say, you know what, making sure you're not going to get 15% margin on this. This is just not a good play for this. But on the owner side, or on the management side, to really challenge them, say, do you really need that SG&A to be that? So really pushing on some of those buttons has been helpful.
All right. So again, I mentioned that today's topic and session was going to be about questions. So I'm going to flip it over and let you ask some questions, and we'll just take this as long as you all want. But somebody has to raise their hand. So, Mac, we got one over here. Mac Lewis. Okay, so to repeat the question for anybody over here who didn't hear it, Max said, as an investor, oftentimes that leads to people joining a board. And so the question would be, when do you supplement through executive coaching or some kind of mentorship or peer-to-peer CEO groups? When do you consider supplementing what you're doing outside of a board?
I guess I would say that it's a CEO's job always to be looking outside for advisors, and it's a mistake to think about a board as an advisory board. That I think an advisory board is a very distinct job, and having a collection of advisors is kind of just, it should be a requirement for the job to bring that in. I often bring advisors to my board meetings to discuss particular topics. So if it's an advisor talking about how to get government funding, or how to get, or you know, an HR topic or something like that, I consider that to be part of my job, is to bring some of that advisory stuff to the board meeting so that the board can kind of hear some of the things, the important voices I'm hearing in terms of what directions we should be considering and looking at.
Ben?
So I would say they're not mutually exclusive. I think you should, as a CEO, you should be looking for that external coaching. And I don't think it necessarily has to be one or the other. I think you can do both. And I have executive coaches I find incredibly valuable that I wouldn't get from the board perspective. So,
Yeah, I'd agree. I worked with two coaches, one with Jeff Redman for the entire time of having the company. I feel like also fractional C-suite services is another way to augment skills, but especially with John joining the board, for me, John Long, he was a tech CEO that was investing his time, and he wouldn't be available as a coach. So I think there's different skill sets and opportunities where having that person engage as a board member is just a really great opportunity in a lot of ways. So I think it just depends. Yeah.
Here, Jacob.
How many people do you put on your board of advisors? How many people do you on board?
To repeat the question so everybody hears it, how many people on the board, and if you have an advisory board, how many people on that?
we have 5. So 3 completely external. The company is owned 60% by my family and 40% by another family. There's a member of that family that's on the board and myself. So we have 5.
I had 2 board members and myself, so 3 on the board.
For our board, we actually went through a contraction recently. So we had grown we had a number of people in observer seats that were non-voting members, and so we had grown to about, I want to say, 8 or 9, including observers, and we actually recently just put it all back down to the voting members only, to 4. It's 4, but it's an odd number, like I have double votes or something like that. But it's, which the voting doesn't really matter. At least if you're getting to the point where the voting matters, then you're in trouble. But it was really important to bring it back down, I think, to your point. The reason why, as a board, we decided we needed to bring it back down is that we were spending a lot of time trying to keep the observers updated. The observers were asking a lot of questions. It was getting to the point where it was disruptive, especially since they were not necessarily making critical decisions for themselves. They were using it as a way to learn more about the company and what was going on, but they weren't trying to make decisions for the company. And so bringing it back down to that size of 4 was really absolutely important to bring more order to the board meetings and keep the board meetings very strategic.
And then Jacob, for a company of your size, smaller is better. All right, Eric.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everything you're sharing with us. What type of personality makes the best board member for you, assuming they have the technical background that you need?
A question, if you didn't hear it over here, is personalities of board members and what maybe is the best board member for you.
I would say so. In my perspective, I'm interested in board members who are confident in their own understanding of the business and making sure they understand that they don't know the whole business, but they understand parts of it or they understand segments of it. I think it's also important for them to be willing to challenge and not be afraid to ask hard questions. I don't need just yes rubber stamps. I need people asking the right questions. So there needs to be that level of confidence and understanding about that. And then also the willingness to learn.
Yeah, that was my initial thought, was I really wanted somebody on the board to challenge me and to give me a different perspective. And I think that perspective of knowing business but not having the whole picture was very useful. But I was looking for that, to be challenged and to have different insights.
I wouldn't add much more. Just, the listening is just absolutely important before challenging.
I would just add to that because I have worked with the 2 ladies here basically weekly for about 5 years. I would say sometimes I wear the white cap and hey, more of a support, and then sometimes I put on the black cap and I'm a little tougher. And when John joined the board, John had a tougher tone than I did, so that I pretty much said, well, I'm going to let John do this. So instead of me going back and forth, I was like, okay, I got the white cap now, and I'll do that. Correct? Am I correct?
It's true. I mean, I would say during the last year, every board meeting with Rick and John Long on the board, every board meeting was challenging and I felt like maybe I got my butt kicked a little bit in a good way, but I always left those board meetings feeling more motivated and inspired that we're on the right track. So they both had a way of doing it in a way that was like, they believed in the vision, they saw where we were headed, we were doing so many things right, but building a SaaS company, growing as fast as we were doing hard things, so that challenge was really, really important, and the support that, it's supposed to be hard, so.
Let's look over this side. Yes, over Kip in the back.
Can you give an example of a situation of the board that was particularly frustrating, but it turned out to be a huge positive once you kind of worked through it?
Okay, for everybody to hear, question is, was there a situation that was very frustrating, but ended up being a positive by having to work through it?
So I'll give you an example of one that's frustrating, and we haven't resolved it yet. We are in the process of acquiring a product line, a digital product line. And it's a relatively small investment, but because it's digital, there's a lot of nurture and care that's going to have to go with it that's going to have an impact on our bottom line. I've been talking about this acquisition for the better part of 6 months and given the board a heads up 2 or 3 times. And I called a meeting a week before we were going to sign the final documents with the board for a final approval. I put in the purchase agreement that the board was having to approve it. So I brought the board together, special meeting, 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon, and they really challenged us around it. And my perspective was, is this a right strategic fit for now? Is this the right strategic fit? So we did a lot of work developing that, and I didn't do enough work on creating the models from a financial perspective. And the board was not happy with that. And they really challenged us to come back to them with the board. So we wound up delaying the closing, and we're supposed to meet this afternoon, so hopefully I can give an answer. But, and the board pushed back and said, don't just tell us what the kind of the normal expectation, let's look at what the worst case could be. We got through COVID where we had to lay off 60% of our staff and, cut expense, all this thing. We've done it, like most of you have survived that. So I don't have any problem with kind of thinking worst case, but they wanted to see it. And they really wanted us to create those scenarios around it, which was, I think, a really positive thing. And my team responded really well to it. I mean, they pulled together and put this modeling together. So I feel real good about where we are. And I do think it's going to be a really good success. But it's been frustrating.
I don't know about frustrating, but maybe at that level, at some level, difficult. This was something I was working on. I feel like all of a sudden this story is a very typical founder story. But if you think, you start the company on your own, and my company went from 5 employees to 25 in 18 months. Working with Jeff, my coach, as well as Rick and the board, trying to build a scalable business. I really was intentional in wanting to let go of things, worked hard to let go of things, put processes in place, hiring people. But there's certain areas like you just don't want to let go of, or you're the last things to let go. And, I think that board and the accountability, and I honestly needed to be pushed on, don't worry about spending the money, like invest the money on the front end on the people, on the resources, so that you're not the one. Because I built built the company very conservatively. I didn't have, significant outside investment. So really had to be pushed on that front end investment of scaling, and ended up being acquired quite a bit earlier than I anticipated. So had I not gotten myself out of the center of the universe of the company and built a scalable business, I wouldn't have been in a position to actually follow through with that acquisition.
And I think like you, we were also in the midst of sort of that frustrating area, but we're in the middle of a major pivot to the defense sector, and so that started with a collaboration with another company that was being run by one of my board members, and but for a range of reasons that I won't get into. We had to sever that relationship. So that's sort of that frustrating point that had to happen. So now it's like things, gets things a little shaky in the boardroom. But it's opening up by severing that relationship. We all had to kind of hold hands and agree that was the right thing to do. We've opened up this huge opportunity to start fundraising in the defense sector, and we couldn't have done that if we hadn't severed that relationship. And so, and it's allowed us to now connect with a lot of investors in that defense sector and get the business going so we can respond to really a lot of world security issues now. So it's been challenging. I think we're kind of through. I would say we're about 60% through that the tricky time. But I think the other thing about these kinds of board matters is that these frustrating times, they're more like eras. They're not a single meeting. It's an era, and you work your way through it, and it's one of those things where you look back and you're like, okay, I'm in a better place now. So that's.
And you're making progress, and you're out raising money, and the board's being very supportive, and.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. All right, one last question, and then I'll wrap it up. Okay, well, way out there in the red, I saw the shirt, the red shirt. Okay, he used the word advisory board, and to be clear, we got a fiduciary board, we got an advisory board, somebody might sit on both. But basically it was, how do you pick somebody who's going to be willing to challenge you, and then how do you hold them accountable? So how do you pick somebody, and then how do you hold them accountable?
Well, when we did our board selection, we put a pretty rigorous interview and selection process in place. And while it's one thing in an interview, but then we also checked references and talked about other boards that he or she had been on. And we got some feedback. So we got a pretty good, clear sense that this was part of their personality, how they were going to frame it. In terms of accountability, that's a good question. I don't know that we've necessarily created that level of accountability for our board that we could.
I think I think it's sort of a requirement to be on a board. If you've selected the right person, they can't help themselves but challenge. I mean, if they're a former business leader, if they're a former, if they've been in the C-suite, or if they've been on other boards, they kind of can't help themselves, regardless of how their compensation is set up. And I struggle. I have to say, I struggle with how do you hold board members accountable? So. Like when I got, the hefty group of observers, I'm not sure I did a great job of following up in the board meetings and saying, when you're doing this thing, it's disruptive and it's taking away from the conversation we could be having. I think that's maybe it's a responsibility of a CEO, or even I think it's helpful to have another board member who's kind of on the same team with kind of managing the boardroom to make sure that everyone's keeping everything on track.
Yeah, it's a difficult question for me because my board grew much more organically in working with Rick, having Rick join the board, and then through the relationships of adding John. And I agree, if they're at that C-suite level, they're going to that's going to be what they're bringing to the table. And, as being such a small board, accountability wasn't something that I was having to be faced with. But I would say, as a leader, if someone you want to be challenged, then the way you respond to it is really important. And, saying you want to be challenged and actually in the moment being challenged is two different things. So, you can expect that of the board, but if as the CEO, you respond negatively, that person might not challenge you again. So.
All right, we're aiming towards the finish line here, so bear with me just a moment. All right, lightning round, 15 seconds or less. One key piece of advice you're going to give a CEO who's either forming or refreshing their board.
I'll go. So what I would say is make sure you're clear on what you want from your board. Be very explicit about that.
I was going to say pick the board that you expect to challenge you. Like I know if I ask Jeff for advice, I'm going to get a certain type of advice, or Rick, so get that diversity of opinion.
I would say making sure that your board members have a been there, done that. They have experience. They've been there before. They've seen some of the challenges, because you need people who are going to understand the kinds of things you're looking at and the challenges of them.
Again, lightning round, short answer. For somebody in the audience who's looking to get on a board, what recommendation do you have? I
would say be mindful of your CEO's time. I think that's something that a lot of board members don't necessarily appreciate, is when they have requests, that it actually can consume a lot of time that takes away from the business.
I'd say be clear on what you think you can bring, but also what you think maybe is a weakness, because it's not expected that you would bring the full set of skills to a board. So what's your niche?
I was thinking about it in terms of authenticity. Make sure you bring your authentic self to the process. My experience when we did interview, or we looked at these 130 applications or resumes, I mean, probably half of them did nothing other than print out their resume and send it to me. And that to me is worthless. So if you really are serious, take some time to figure out what you think you could add to this, and let me know. So.
All right, and then how about one thing you want the audience to take with them today when they reflect about the session?
I want you to take your guest check home. Make sure you use that as for your grocery lists. Make sure you use it for playing restaurant with your kids. So.
If you're someone like me in the early stages of a company, I think recognizing that a board can bring a lot of value to the founder and CEO, and something that maybe I wish I would have done sooner rather than later.
And I would say, if you're a CEO, if board meeting prep, if board meetings are bringing you down, then you really need to rethink what's going on in the boardroom.
I like that one. All right, thank you for being here. Again, I hope you have a sticker for your parking pass. Coming up May 1st, all things digital marketing right here. Leilani Bloomquist, Darren Lynch, and Brian Berg. The next PDA event is May 14th, leveraging your nonprofit board experience to a private company board. So I hope to see you here on May 1st, as well as at the PDA meeting May 14th. Thank you for coming.